Good afternoon. This is Attorney Elise Gross. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm an attorney with the Presser Law Firm. I've been practicing in South Florida for over 20 years in the field of asset protection and estate planning. After today's webinar, if you're interested in being on our newsletter, if you're not already getting it, in having a complimentary preliminary consultation, in hearing any one of our attorneys speak, if you have a group that would be interested in any topic on either asset protection or estate planning, then we would be happy to accommodate you. There's going to be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions, please email them in to info@assetprotectionattorneys.com. The call-in number is going to be typed in the chat box in case you get disconnected. Today we're going to be talking about business succession planning, the benefits of it, why you should have it, how the planning goes, the types of strategies you might use, and then we'll wrap it up with how business succession works with estate planning. Business succession planning is basically the process of identifying and developing an internal structure that involves the people who have the potential to fill all of your key business leadership positions inside your company. And these people, they're either going to be family members, they can be employees, business partners, associates, people who have similar companies that might want to merge with your company or take it over. And business exit planning is basically the exit-related strategies of how you get out of the business and working with the business succession plan in order to make that happen. So this could also include, how the business is going to continue, what the leadership is going to be once you leave. And the difference between these two is basically that succession planning is used for closely held businesses where the owner wants the business to continue after his death, and exit planning is more of a broader category and covers when the business owner actually steps away from the company for whatever reason. And we usually discuss them as one concept, so we're going to kind of use them interchangeably throughout the webinar. There's several benefits to planning for succession planning and exit planning. First, it increases the likelihood that the value of your business is going to be maintained despite the loss of you as the original owner. And it also allows for the business partners to carry on the business without the involvement, whether the owner was deceased or whether they've become incapacitated, and without, most importantly, to carry on the business without the decedent's heirs. The decedent is the person that's passed away, the prior owner of the business. And it allows for the availability of experienced and capable successors to be able to assume their important managerial roles inside the business because they already know that this is going to happen. So because the plan is in place, they know what's coming, and everybody is kind of in line, ready to assume whatever positions they were meant to assume. And it also minimizes the risk that the business is going to stop and makes it more efficient when it transitions to a new management. When you're dealing with business succession planning and exit planning, you have to look at what are the owner's objectives. So the first question you have to ask is, how many owners are there? Is it a single owner? Are there multiple owners? Because the planning is going to be can be very different depending on how many owners we're talking about. If it's multiple owners, then you're talking more about how do you compensate for the deceased's share in the business, how do you compensate his estate, and who's going to assume those key roles in the business once this guy is no longer there. With succession planning, you're first going to look at who are you going to groom as your successor, and that's if you're going to have somebody who's coming in from the inside. So if you've got a key employee, if you're thinking that they're going to be taking over after your death or disability, or even after you just leave the company and want to get out, then you have to groom them. You have to make sure that they know what's going to be expected of them and that they're the proper person to take over that role. Now this could be a family member. Maybe you're going to pass along to another generation, or to a brother or sister, or it could actually be a key employee. And this person should know what the intentions are. And the key is, by them knowing what's in store for them, you'd think they'd actually be motivated to treat the business like it's their own from the beginning, because they know they've got a stake in its success. So it's been used as a motivating tool for key employees, or even, of course, for family members who are involved in business. And if you're bothering with this type of planning, then one of your objections is going to be to prevent an external takeover of the business. Because if you're planning within and you've got a good strategy, you want to make sure that you're covered so that nobody else tries to take over this business. If a third party, somebody who's not with you, comes in and to take over the business, then the business might be valued as less than if you had somebody internally taking it over. And the risk there is that if somebody comes and takes it over, then your employees could lose their jobs if it's going to be absorbed into somebody else's company. So people are motivated if you tell them that there's a plan. You also want to plan, if possible, to try to avoid having to do a formal valuation of the business at the owner's death. Now that's more of a tax issue, because if you pass away and your business has value, then it's potentially going to need to be valued so that the IRS knows what you're going to be paying taxes on. So if you can avoid a formal valuation, and it's not always avoidable, then that might be good. However, if it's a successful business, which of course we hope that all of our businesses will be successful, then the IRS is definitely going to require a formal valuation. It will, however, take a lot of time, and it will be expensive. So if you have some sort of buyout clause with a buy-sell agreement, which we'll talk a little bit about, then that's the way to kind of set the value. So when you do the buy-sell, that's basically an agreement between you and a partner. That's usually how it works, that sets some sort of formula for figuring out the fair market value of your business should one of you pass away, or should one of you want out of the business. And usually that's something that you predetermine. It's not necessarily that you figure out the number that you would pay each other, or that you'd pay each other's estate. It's usually more of a formula, because those who do things properly are going to do the buy-sell way in advance of really knowing how successful the business is going to be. So to put a number on it doesn't make much sense. So you want to come up with some sort of proper formula that would reasonably and fairly compensate each other for the business itself. That buy-sell agreement, great tool to be used if you have partners in a business. We've seen it with doctors. If you're a doctor and you're part of a medical practice that you helped build, what happens if you become disabled or you die? Obviously your spouse isn't going to go into the business because they're not a doctor. And your partners wouldn't want your spouse involved anyway. So by having that buy-sell, it sets the formula for your other partners to buy you out from your estate, and then your spouse or family members wouldn't be able to complain about it because the valuation had already been set by you, and it's a win-win for everyone. Now, in order to fund that buy-sell and that buyout, usually you're going to have life insurance. You and your partners would have life insurance on each other. The company, it's done in many different ways. Sometimes the company owns it and the company is the beneficiary, and then the company buys back your interest. Sometimes it's individually owned. You would own the insurance on your partner would own insurance on you. Those are all things that have to be negotiated. And business exit planning has similar objectives to the succession planning, but in that case the main thing you want to look at is minimizing the risk of forfeiting your business. You don't want all your hard work that you put into the business to have no value if you leave. You built something and it should continue even if you're no longer involved and have sold out or retired. The good thing about retirement is that you usually have some sort of planned date, and therefore you have the opportunity to transition out of the business efficiently. Whereas if you pass away, obviously, usually that's not a planned event, and it's much harder to know when to expect that. So that's the reason you do this type of planning, because you just don't know. The value of the company upon the owner's exit, for whatever reason, can be enhanced through mergers and acquisitions. And a merger is one where one business merges with the other, whereas an acquisition is when your company is taken over by another company and it's absorbed into that company. The terms here are important, especially when your business is a corporation and there are issued shares. When the companies merge or one company acquires the stock of another, there can be stock incentives as well as an increase or decrease in share value. So a well-run company with a solid succession and exit plan can use mergers and acquisitions to its advantage. And a company that's not well-run and hasn't made any advanced plan is really ripe for the takeover when key people exit the company. Because if your key people are gone, then you know who's running the company in the event. Even if you're around, if you don't have the key people, it's going to devalue your company. But if you're not there, then the lack of key people, that makes your company very vulnerable to somebody else to come in and take it over. Different types of plans. There's different types of things that you can do. Number one, you can have an outright purchase either by a key employee or a family member, or it could even be somebody, a third party, who has made a plan with you that if something happens to you or you want out of it, they're going to buy it. Now, you as the owner can gift the company to family members or to key employees, or you can leave the company specifically in a will or trust to key family members or employees. As an estate planning and asset protection attorney, I've pretty much seen it all. But the owner must think very wisely before you're gifting any ownership in the company, because if he makes a family member the owner and the employees don't respect that new owner, you're going to have dissension in the ranks and the value of the company is going to drop. So what I recommend is if you're planning to install a family member as the owner and the boss, then you should have that person be involved as soon as possible, starting from the bottom up. Let them earn their respect. They should learn every job within the company and then put them in a management position when they're ready to be in that management position. Obviously keeping in mind that you never know when a person is going to pass away or be disabled, so make sure that you start planning this way early on so that you at least minimize the risk of them still being uneducated in the business when it's time for them to take over. But if they start from the bottom, if they earn the respect of everybody, then it's going to make the transition much easier. And it's going to give you an opportunity, really, to observe how they handle everything and how they handle the employees and make business decisions. Because maybe your first choice isn't your best choice and you've got to try again. So if you can accomplish succession planning by an entity purchase agreement where someone can actually purchase the company from you after your death, then you have that predetermined buyer in the contract in place, whether that's your employee, your family member, or whether it's an outside party who has said that they'll buy you out in the event that you're going to be out of the business. So just to recap on that, if you know who you think is going to ultimately run the company, if it's an insider, family member, or key employee, get them started from the bottom up and let them earn the respect and you have an opportunity to make sure that they're the right person. The gift or bequest, you've got to be really careful with who you're gifting and the interest to, because there can also be some tax consequences to it, but it is a way of leaving the company to beneficiaries, whether it's one person or multiple people. And then finally, that entity purchase agreement, that's usually with a third party who's willing to buy you out, and you come to terms in advance with a formula in order to determine what the value of the company is, so that when it's their time to buy you out, there's really not going to be any problem because the valuation has already been established. In order to accomplish your succession planning, you've got to start with goals and objectives. And first you have to decide if you want the business to continue or to be sold. And you really have to sit down and make that decision before you can do anything. And if you want the business to continue, then you have to identify and groom that successor to assume your place, like we talked about before. And it's important that you keep in mind that you can train someone and teach them your methods, but ultimately they're going to have their own ideas, and you should evaluate those ideas because no two people are going to run a company the same way. And when you appoint a successor, it's almost like appointing a guardian for your children. It's hard to imagine not being in control, and it's hard to imagine anyone doing things the way you're going to do them. But you really have no choice. If the business is going to continue, you have to find that person. So when you're at the beginning stages of the planning, you may not know who's going to be your successor. So obviously you want to look towards family members first and then into your employee pool. Who do you have working for you? Who's got the greatest promise to take over? You want to get to know all those employees, and see how they think. Are they going to make educated decisions? Train them to make decisions similar to what you would. Obviously, I believe that every person should, have some sort of succession plan and an estate plan to work together so that if you are choosing a family member, then that family member is going to get a good part of the business. If that family member is going to get a good part of the business, then you have to compensate your other beneficiaries not to be a part of the business. So if your business is worth 50% of your estate, then there has to be a way where you compensate the other members of your family. Maybe you make them minority shareholders or interest holders in your company. It's something that you really need to sit down with both your estate planning attorney and asset protection attorney, and hopefully it's somebody like myself who does them both, who can really sit down and evaluate everything at one session and know how the best way to accomplish the whole goal is. And you want to also create some sort of transition plan because, as I said, if you work that estate planning in with your asset protection plan along with your succession plan, how is everything going to be accomplished? What is going to happen if your business is in a very good position, but either you pass away, you become disabled, or you just want out? What's the transition? Who's going to be taking over immediately? Maybe you have an interim successor until the company can, be taken over by key employees or by family members. What if that family member that you're thinking is a good choice is not ready? They haven't finished school yet. They're not, up to the task. Who's your interim person going to be? These are all things that you need to consider when you're dealing with, your succession planning. Here's some other types of ways to do things. Now, obviously, the IPO, that is the initial public offering. That's when you've got a company that you really think has some major potential, where you think it can go public and you think the shares are going to be worth a significant amount of money. This is not something you're going to do on your own. This is something that has to be planned out. There's SEC rules that go along with this. But if you really think that your business has this potential, then why not? This is something that you can do, and it's a way of getting the best you can out of the business for yourself. It ends up where you're not going to have, you'll end up with usually a majority of the stock, but you're going to be giving up some to the public, so there's going to be a lot of shares outstanding. And this is something that you can have your employees take part in. It can be extremely motivating to the employees by giving them stock options. It can also be a way of getting family members involved. It can be a way of, really revaluing your company and bringing it to a whole new level. A few years ago, there was a huge IPO when you had Facebook went public. There was so much hype to that offering that the initial owners made outrageous sums of money, but a lot of the purchasers overpaid, and then the stock ended up going down pretty quickly. It's probably normalized at this point, but if you have somebody in your corner who's really, really building up your company in order for the IPO to hit, well, you can make a significant sum of money on this, and it's obviously a very good way to motivate those employees to be part of this. You can do a management buyout. That's basically when your management, some of your key players want to take over. You're ready to get out. They say, we want to buy the company out. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can come up with some sort of installment sale structure. You can help them borrow the money. You can fund the buyout yourself. But basically what you're doing is you're allowing key people who you've seen run the company buy you out so that you can get out of the situation. This is usually not for when you pass away. This is usually something that comes up, not predetermined, but that comes up where you've, told people, you're ready to exit, and the management says, we don't want you to sell, we don't want you to have somebody take over, we would really like to buy out your interest. So that's where you come in on a management buyout, and why not? You sit down with those key players and come up with some sort of way of valuing the company and having them buy it out. And that's going to motivate them, and that's going to keep the business going, which, depending on what type of business it is, could really be a legacy to you. And then obviously business succession, which is what we've talked about, which is where you plan in advance. So the IPO and the management buyout are usually not much in the way of advanced planning, whereas the business succession planning is advanced planning. That's where you have come up with a strategy, whether it's with the family member, the key employee, with a third party who's going to want your business if something happens. That's where you've established the valuation. Maybe you've done the buy-sell funded by life insurance. A lot of different factors can go into that. But these are really three ways that you can accomplish getting out of your company or maximizing its value. When you want to accomplish that business exit planning, you want to establish your goals and objectives, just as you would with business succession planning. And the idea being, no matter what you do, if you've spent your time building something up, then you want to get the most out of it. And whether it's you or whether it's your family after you pass, somebody wants to preserve the value of that company. We all know that if you pass and the company really is you, that you're the one providing all the services of the company, that you're the value of the company, then should something happen to you, whether you pass away or you have some sort of unexpected disability event, the entire company is going to go down and the value is going to plummet. If you put in a plan where there's someone who can take over for you, then you have a way of building and preserving that value. Think about it. If you're retiring or you're disabled and you want your business to be able to provide income for your family, the only way it's going to provide income is if someone is really serving in the same capacity that you were and is able to manage that business in such a way that it actually maximizes its value and can give you and your family some income to support you. So that's the key factor here, is the building and preserving the value. And how you do that, again, it all comes down to the same thing. What have you planned in advance? Who is going to be the right person to take it over? Who is going to have the right skills? Where are they going to get the sources of funding in order to buy you out or keep the company going so that the company can continue to grow, whether you're in it or you're not in it? Because the continuity of that business can be very important, whether it's the income to you and your family, whether it's if your family stays in the business after you pass away, whether it's even for the key employees who are taking the business over. The business continuity is going to be critical. And the personal estate planning and wealth management, that all goes along with the business succession planning and the business exit planning. Because the way I look at it is your business could be a very key part of your estate. It could be, in fact, the most valuable part of your estate. I have many clients who have closely held businesses that they've worked in and built up for 30, 35 years. Yes, they have money in addition to that. But their business is really the most important and most valuable asset of their estate. So what they have to do is they have to make sure that that asset is preserved. If it's worth $20 million with you running it, then that should be value that your estate gets upon your death. But if you're the only person who can run the business, then, at your death, you're going to have to pay some estate taxes. The government's going to say, okay, we need you to sell that business in order to pay the estate taxes. And now the business is essentially sold at a fire sale, and you had no plan in place, and therefore that $20 million becomes maybe $10 million, and most of it goes to the government. So you want to, make sure that you've got the estate plan along with the succession plan, and that you're managing that. The wealth management, wealth management can be, how you manage your personal wealth, whether it's your stocks, bonds, what kind of advisors you have, but it really also is in conjunction with, your business succession planning. Your financial advisor should be asking you whether or not you have a succession plan, not just because they want to sell you life insurance, but because it's really critical, because they know that it's going to affect, your ultimate estate plan. So, if your financial planner is not asking you about that, then you really should be, talking to them about it so that everybody is on that same page. We've already kind of touched upon how the estate planning works with the business planning. We've talked about, in order to maximize your wealth objectives, meaning how do I leave the most amount of money to my family should I pass away? How do I maximize my income as I become disabled? That's where, those wealth objectives work with the estate planning, because we all want to maximize. We've worked very hard in our lives. We all want to make sure that, we give the government whatever they require, but that our family gets the most. So you have to intertwine that estate plan with your business succession planning, with your asset protection plan, in order to really maximize everything. Now, I think it behooves us to go into asset protection just for a moment, because I've mentioned it a few times. I don't know if any of you have sat in on any asset protection webinars before, but I think it's not really what we're talking about today, but I think it's important to touch upon it. Asset protection is basically how your assets are titled to make them exempt from creditors to the extent possible, and that's future potential creditors. I'm not talking about existing creditors or where you have a lawsuit. I'm talking about planning in advance so that if you do get a creditor later on, how do you keep that asset away from them? And the reason that's important is because, number one, we talked about that your business could be your most valuable asset. You don't own it correctly to asset protect it. It doesn't really matter how successful you become because the business is vulnerable to creditors. So that's really a key component to owning your business in the first place. How do you own it? Is it owned in a good asset protection structure? Once it's owned in a good asset protection structure, then you can properly deal with what happens if you retire, become disabled, or you die. And then the estate planning goes right along with it. If you become disabled, who's handling things for you? Who's going to take over that business for you? Do you have a power of attorney in place for the business that somebody can handle things for you if you're still alive but incapable of handling things for yourself? Do you have a proper estate plan? Do you have a trust? What things do you have in place that are going to secure for your family the maximization of that business, whether they continue to own it or whether your top management or key employees are buying you out or taking over, whether there's a partner involved, whether there's a third party who's going to take over? It doesn't really matter. The end goal is obviously maximize that personal wealth through proper estate planning and succession planning. Now, if you think that this business is going to continue for generations down the road, then that requires a little bit of different planning, because in that situation, you have to do kind of a hybrid. You're going to want the family to be involved, but you're probably also going to want a non-family member key employee involved, because that person is going to be able to moderate family squabbles and things of that nature, and they're going to provide a consistency that maybe, the family for generations may not. So always have that. Don't assume that the family is going to be the only ones in charge. It may be good, it may not be good. You've got to know the people that are involved. You've got to know your family members. But if there's going to be multiple family members involved, it's not a bad idea to have someone who's a third party, who's outside the family, who can kind of monitor the situation and keep the peace. No matter what you do, hopefully you're going to have plans in place for all the things that we've talked about. You always want to review and update your estate planning on a regular basis if you have a business. You want to do it anyway, but if you have a business, because goals change. At one point you may have, when you were younger, you thought, oh, this thing's going to last forever. This is going to go on to the next generation. My children are going to want to be in this business. But I've met with many people, and I would say probably about 50% have some relative, whether it's a child or a sibling or a niece or nephew, someone who wants to be in the business and is being groomed for the business, and that works great. But then the other ones, their children, their family members, nobody has any interest. So here you've built everything up thinking it's going to be a legacy, and in the end, how are you going to keep this going for your life and then maximize it on your death? So your goals may change. So you always have to look at it on a regular basis. I always say you should revisit your estate plan every 1 to 3 years, or if some major event happens. Maybe, God forbid, you had some sort of major health crisis, whatever it is. Always keep it current. If you keep it current, then you're prepared. If you don't keep it current, then it's like buying $100,000 of life insurance when you're 20, and in 30 years you really need a few million, but you never bother to change it and get higher insurance, and now it's too late. So it's very critical that you always keep that plan current. What we're going to do now is, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to go offline for a moment or two so we can collect the questions. And if you wouldn't mind answering the poll that we're going to put up, and I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm back. We have a couple of questions. The first one was, are there any other reasons to consider business succession planning that you didn't mention in the webinar? And let's see, if you become physically or emotionally unable to perform your duties within the job, within running the company, then that's something you should be addressing. If you're partners with your spouse and you get a divorce, then you have to, more than succession plan, you're going to end up dividing that company as part of the divorce, and you might have to buy out the other partner. So think about it. You really should have treated your spouse as a partner to begin with and had a buy-sell, because now you're going to deal with it in a court with a judge with a marital settlement agreement, and it could be overly complicated. Now, we have had clients who've actually maintain the business relationship with their spouse even after they split up. So obviously that would be the best of circumstances, but that doesn't always happen. So before it gets ugly, because that's worse than having a regular business partner, because now you've put an emotional role into this. So you should treat your spouse just as if you would treat any other business partner. And then maybe if you're working your business and you have a change of heart and you want to start something new, then you want out. How are you going to get out? That's something you might want to consider in terms of the planning. Another question we had is, when should I start to consider business succession planning? Well, that one's easy. Yesterday. The minute you are conceiving of having a business, or at least once you've started the business, think about the succession plan. Now, that doesn't mean you need to have an elaborate plan in place from day one. It just means you need to be thinking about it. Because ultimately, if this is going to be your support and your family's support, don't put yourself in a position to have to imagine this stuff and deal with it later on. You don't want if you have a partner, you don't want your partner to have to deal with your spouse if something happens to you, and vice versa. You don't want to deal with your partner's spouse or family. You don't want to have to go to a judge and have the judge figure it out. That's going to be costly, time-consuming, and you could lose a lot of business that way. So plan in advance if you can. If you can't plan in advance, plan as soon as you can. But don't wait, because a business is only as good as the planning that you've done in order to keep it. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Just a reminder, we do have our weekly newsletters if you're not already on it and receiving it. We have preliminary complimentary consultations if you're interested in any topic. You can just call us regarding anything and we'll see what we can do to help you. And we have speaking engagements. All of our attorneys are national speakers, and if there's a topic on estate planning or asset protection, you have a group of people that are looking to have that addressed, we'll certainly see what we can do to accommodate you. So thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of the day.